our belief, we understand from inside the community, that they had dropped their ascent weights and they were coming up trying to manage an emergency.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Titan's hull began to crack under pressure, and its inside sensors gave the passengers a warning to that effect. That's according to what James Cameron, told NPR. He said, quote, "We understand from inside the community that they had dropped their ascent weights and they were coming up. They were trying to manage an emergency," Cameron said. In other words, Titan was descending. Something happened. They heard distortions. They heard perhaps alerts in the superstructure. And so they stopped descending and then started ascending to the surface when the carbon fiber cylinder imploded. Going back to the article, quote, "The Titanic director is no stranger to deep-sea exploration. He's made a whopping 33 dives to the shipwreck himself, even calculating that he spent more time on the Titanic than his own captain did a century ago," end quote. So this is a completely different narrative to the one where there was no warning and everyone died in a millisecond and they didn't know what hit them, and so it was a painless death. There was no fear, and this is a totally different story. In this scenario, all 5 passengers were trying to race back up to the surface before the hull blew, but it was already too late.
Stockton did himself, and he heard the carbon fiber making cracking sounds, and he told us all before dive number 2 to be prepared for that. And at one point, I was actually even able to drive the submarine towards deeper water by the sound of the cracking getting louder.
If this is true, then it puts into a real perspective, once again, the very last communications between the ship, the Polar Prince, and the sub. I also find it very curious. We've heard so many people talk about going down and in this particular vehicle, and so few have mentioned this crackling noise. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, our friends at News Nation are saying that experts feel it's going to take months to piece together what happened. It's an article titled, "Source of Titan Failure Could Take Months to Piece Together." But I don't think you need to be a materials engineer or a rocket scientist to make an educated guess. The Financial Times have put up a brilliant graphic that shows the various materials that comprise the structure of OceanGate's Titan. The anomalous structure on Titan was the cylindrical midsection. So there are 2 titanium, if you think of it like a sausage, the parts on either end of the sausage are titanium, the rounded parts, but the cylinder in the middle, that is the critical section, that is not titanium, and that is actually, I would say, the weakest link. That is also where the carbon fiber was laid down, and we know that the sections that have already been found are those titanium sections from the front hemisphere, the one with the window, as well as the rear titanium hemisphere, and then also the struts and I believe part of the rear fin. The only part they haven't found is the imploded, which is to say shattered, composite material comprising the cylinder. According to NPR, James Cameron also said, quote, "Pressure hulls should be made out of contiguous material, like steel, like titanium, something that is ceramic or acrylic," he said, "in order to do modeling and finite element analysis to understand the number of cycles that it can take. But that's not the case with a composite material, and carbon fiber is that. A composite material is made of 2 different materials blended together, and so the way that breaks down is less predictable. Carbon fiber is by definition 2 different materials. It is the woven carbon filaments and then a kind of plastic resin. When the fibers are baked in this composite, it creates a polymer. While it is extremely strong, stiff, light, and rigid, it's also very brittle. And while it has high heat tolerance, I'm not sure if it is as good with sub-zero or very cold temperatures, or cold temperatures and high pressures at the same time. Now, in simple terms, metals such as titanium have greater elasticity under various temperatures and pressures because of their homogeneous crystalline structures, whereas carbon fiber doesn't absorb shocks as well and won't flex as much. Going back to what Cameron told NPR, he said, quote, "And so we all knew that the danger was delamination and progressive failure over time with microscopic water ingress and what they call cycling fatigue." Now, delamination is another word for splitting, cracking, or separation. It's a problem unique to composites, whereas a crystal-type material like metal does not have this issue. Cameron also said the following, quote, "And we knew if the sub passed its pressure test, it wasn't going to fail on its first dive, but it's going to fail over time, which is insidious. You don't get that with steel or titanium." Does that make sense? So with this particular material, it can pass that initial test. What it won't be able to pass is successive testing, and that is where it is a somewhat limited material compared to steel or titanium. The big advantage with something like carbon fiber is it's a lot lighter and cheaper, but then obviously it's also less durable. So the part that failed, can you see, is not rocket science. If you have a basic understanding of how the various materials react or deform under pressure, if you've got a sense of the elasticity of the one type of material compared to another, it is actually common sense. Now, I'm not going to take it further than that, but what I do want to do is do a hypothetical analysis of what could have happened, what may have happened if there were survivors, if the ROVs had encountered someone inside an intact submersible, right? Let's say there was just a power failure. What would the odds have been of getting them out safely? And one way we're going to look at that is look at another example of where someone was in that situation and barely survived. What does that look like? What does that feel like? It is pretty scary stuff. A final point to make is that if the Titan was ascending when this catastrophic failure took place, then you can also imagine there was quite a long drop from whatever height to the where the fragments were found. And that is also why the fragments are where they are and why some of them can't be found at this point. It's also likely that those fragments hit the seabed at quite considerable speed as well. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
By the time we're done testing it, I believe it's pretty much invulnerable.
And that's pretty much what they said about the Titanic.
That's right.